What happens when a flight attendant slaps a woman she assumes doesn't belong, only to discover she owns the plane and her job? The first thing Lauren Mitchell noticed as she stepped onto the tarmac in Naples, Florida, was the thick scent of jet fuel mingling with the salty Gulf breeze. She pulled her navy blazer tighter, the morning wind sweeping across the private airfield. The Gulfstream G650 gleamed under the rising sun, polished to near blinding perfection. It was her plane, her pride, but no one would have guessed it looking at her. Lauren climbed the short staircase, her low heels clicking softly on each step. Inside, the cabin was still empty and quiet, with plush leather seats and walnut paneling awaiting guests. She set her carry-on beside her preferred seat, right side, second row. Without thinking, she slipped off her blazer and draped it over the seat. The flight was a routine hop to Atlanta, a quick stop for a board meeting, back to Naples by evening. Lauren checked her watch. She was early, as always. She liked the quiet before the day consumed her. But that calm didn't last. A sharp voice cut through from behind. "Excuse me, who are you? And what are you doing here?" Lauren turned slowly. A flight attendant, mid-30s, slim, with ash blonde hair in a tight bun, marched down the aisle toward her. Her face was pinched with suspicion, her posture rigid, like she was bracing for a fight. Lauren kept her voice even. "I'm supposed to be here," she said simply, offering a polite smile. The attendant didn't soften. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed tightly. "And who exactly said you could board this plane?" Lauren blinked. "Is this for real?" "I own the plane," she said calmly, her words steady and measured. The attendant's laugh was sharp, almost a bark. "Right," she said. "Ma'am, I need you to leave. Now." For a long second, Lauren didn't move. She just looked at the woman, trying to gauge if this was some kind of prank. But the attendant's stare wasn't playful. It was hard, real. Lauren took a small step forward, voice still level. "My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm the owner of Mitchell Aerospace. This is my plane." The silence that followed was heavy, awkward, but it didn't break the attendant's resolve. If anything, she dug in harder, as if she hadn't heard or refused to believe it. "You need to leave," the attendant repeated, sharper, louder, slicing through the cabin like a blade. Lauren felt anger rising in her chest, but swallowed it. She wasn't going to raise her voice. She wasn't going to make a scene. That wasn't who she was. Not here. Not anywhere. But before she could say another word, the woman reached out and grabbed her arm. That's when things went from bad to outright dangerous. Lauren instinctively pulled her arm back, her movement sharp but controlled. "Let go of me," she said, her voice dropping a few degrees colder. No shouting, no panic, just a firm, clear warning. But the attendant, whose name tag read Jessica, didn't back down. Instead, she stepped closer, her face a mix of disbelief and something uglier. "You think you can just walk onto private property and score a free ride?" Jessica hissed. "I don't know what scam you're pulling, but not today." Lauren squared her shoulders, locking eyes with her. "I'm not running a scam," she said. "I'm the reason this plane exists. You don't know who you're talking to." Outside, the tarmac hummed as engines coughed to life. distant and rumbling. Inside the cabin, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them, a standoff suspended in thick, heavy air. For a moment, Lauren thought maybe Jessica would finally listen, realize her mistake. But instead, Jessica's gaze flicked over Lauren's jeans, her simple flats, the blazer casually tossed on the seat, and her expression hardened further. In her mind, Lauren didn't look like a billionaire. She didn't match the image Jessica had conjured. Slick white businessmen or older gentlemen in tailored suits with Rolexes. Lauren could see it all playing out in her eyes like watching a bad movie with a predictable ending. She tried one more time, slower. "Call the captain," Lauren said. "Get—" She didn't finish. In a flash of reckless fury, Jessica raised her hand and slapped her. The sharp crack echoed through the cabin, bouncing off polished walls and leather seats. Lauren didn't stumble. She didn't cry out. She didn't even flinch. She just stood there, slowly raising a hand to touch her cheek, her brown eyes locking onto Jessica's with a cold, unnerving calm. For the first time, Jessica seemed to realize she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Passengers began boarding behind them, carrying bags, murmuring quietly, but they froze at the scene. You could have heard a pin drop. A man, a tech exec from Miami, dropped his coffee cup. It hit the carpet with a soft thud, steaming liquid seeping into the fibers. A woman, a real estate investor from Tampa, gasped loudly and pulled her son behind her like a shield. Everyone stared at Lauren, not with suspicion, but with something closer to horror. Lauren let the moment stretch, each second tightening like a rubber band about to snap. Her cheek still stung, but she didn't touch it again. She didn't give Jessica the satisfaction of seeing her react. Instead, she leaned down calmly, lifted her blazer from the seat, and brushed an invisible speck from the sleeve. Jessica, meanwhile, seemed to realize too late that she might have made the biggest mistake of her career. "I'm calling security," she muttered, fumbling for a small radio clipped to her waist, hands shaking. "You're trespassing." Lauren slid one arm into her blazer, then the other, moving with deliberate control. "Please," she said softly. "Call them." A few new passengers exchanged nervous glances, some back toward the door, unsure whether to stay or leave. No one dared intervene, as if waiting for whoever would toss the next match into this powder keg. Finally, the captain emerged from the cockpit, a tall man with deep brown skin and graying temples, his brow deeply furrowed. His name was Captain David Ellis, and he'd flown for Mitchell Aerospace for nearly 7 years. He recognized Lauren instantly, his eyes widening before narrowing sharply. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, loud enough to cut through the tension. "Is everything all right?" Jessica whipped around, staring at the captain like he'd spoken another language. "Ms. Mitchell?" Her lips mouthed silently. Lauren didn't acknowledge her. She kept her gaze on Captain Ellis and gave a slight nod. "Captain," she said, "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding." Captain Ellis stepped forward, his movements taut but respectful. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he said, shooting Jessica a piercing look. "We'll handle this immediately." Jessica's face drained of color. She glanced wildly around like she was searching for an escape, as if this could still be salvaged. You're not serious," she said, voice cracking. "This woman said she owns the plane." Lauren finally turned her full attention back to her. "I don't just own the plane," she said, her voice smooth as glass. I own Mitchell Aerospace Group, this plane, this flight, every employee on it. She let that land, let Jessica's world tilt and capsize while the rest of the cabin hung on every word. But the humiliation was just the beginning. Things were about to get worse. Jessica stood, frozen, her mouth slightly agape, the radio dangling in her fingers. You could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as the reality crashed down. A passenger started whispering furiously. A man by the door shook his head in disgust. Someone else pulled out a phone, lens aimed at Jessica, ready to capture the next disaster. Captain Ellis stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Lauren and Jessica could hear. "You need to apologize," he said firmly. "Now." Jessica's eyes darted from the captain to Lauren and back. "Apologize? For slapping the woman who had every right to be here, who literally owned everything in her reach?" For a second it looked like she might argue. Her body tensed, her jaw clenched so tight it seemed it might crack. But then something in her deflated. Her shoulders slumped, her face flushed with thick, shameful red. I'm sorry," she stammered, the words weak, weightless. Lauren looked at her, unmoving. She wasn't interested in a rehearsed line. She didn't want a performance for the passengers. She wanted Jessica to feel it, to understand that her snap judgments, her biases, her disrespect hadn't just bruised Lauren's pride. They'd exposed a deeper sickness. Lauren reached slowly into her blazer's inner pocket. Without a word, she pulled out a small, heavy business card, black with gold foil, minimalist and powerful, and placed it on the nearest tray table between them, like a gauntlet thrown. In crisp, clear letters, it read, "Lauren Mitchell, CEO and founder, Mitchell Aerospace Group." Jessica stared at it like it was a live wire. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. She stepped back instinctively, bumping into a seat and grabbing it for balance. Captain Ellis turned to Lauren. "Would you like her removed from the flight, Ms. Mitchell?" Lauren didn't answer right away. She glanced at the silent, wide-eyed passengers, at the crew nervously clustered by the cockpit door, and finally back at Jessica, who stood small and trembling, like a child awaiting punishment. Lauren could have destroyed her, publicly fired her on the spot, sued her, ensured she never worked in aviation again. But Lauren wasn't here to break things. She was here to teach. "No," Lauren said finally, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "She stays." The cabin seemed to exhale all at once. A long, shaky breath no one realized they'd been holding. Jessica looked up, confused, shaken, almost grateful. But Lauren wasn't done. "You'll serve me," Lauren said simply, "with respect, with care, the way you should have from the start. Let's see if you can learn something today." If Jessica thought the worst was over, she was wrong. It was just beginning. The silence in the plane lingered, broken only by the low hum of engines warming up for taxiing. Jessica nodded, swallowing hard. Her hands clenched so tight her knuckles whitened. She stepped back, adjusting her uniform jacket, trying to piece herself together. Lauren settled into her seat, like she had all the time in the world. She crossed one leg over the other and gazed out the window, ignoring the growing heat in the room around her. It was the longest boarding process any passenger on that plane had ever seen. Every new passenger stepping aboard shot Jessica a questioning look. Some whispered behind their hands. Some shook their heads openly. A few murmured, "That's her." Moving toward Lauren with wide eyes, Jessica forced herself through the motions, a tight smile, offering drinks with a strained throat, moving like a puppet with tangled strings. Each time she glanced at Lauren, she was reminded, not by words, but by presence alone, that she'd underestimated someone with more power than she could fathom. As the plane lifted off over Florida's shimmering coast, Lauren leaned back and closed her eyes, feeling the faint pull of gravity fade. She didn't need to speak. The lesson was unfolding, without her lifting a finger. 2 hours into the flight, Jessica approached Lauren's seat, nervously smoothing her jacket's hem. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost trembling. Lauren opened her eyes slowly. "Water," she said. "Room temperature. No ice." "Of course," Jessica nodded, hurrying to fulfill the simple order like her life depended on it. Passengers watched from the corners of their eyes, pretending to read magazines or check emails, but no one missed the shift in energy. Everyone felt it. This wasn't about a drink, it was about respect, and how easily it could have been given or withheld based on assumptions alone. When Jessica returned, her hands were steady but tense, placing the glass on the table with both hands, careful not to spill a drop. Lauren glanced at the glass, then at her. "Thank you," Lauren said. It was simple, polite, but coming from her, it felt like a mountain had moved. Jessica stepped back, nodded, and retreated to her station like a dismissed soldier. The rest of the flight passed in strange silence. No arguments, no shouting, just the weight of consequences settling over everyone like a thick blanket. But the real reckoning awaited on landing. When the wheels touched down at DeKalb Peachtree Airport in Atlanta, the plane glided to a stop on the private terminal's tarmac. The sun had climbed higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the asphalt. The cabin air felt dense, almost heavier than the humid Georgia air outside. Captain Ellis made the standard intercom announcement, thanking passengers for flying with Mitchell Aerospace. But this time, his voice was crisper, cautious. As passengers gathered their belongings, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses stood by the door. He wasn't a typical pilot or crew member. He was corporate, Lauren's corporate. Jessica noticed him instantly and shrank further if that was possible. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp on her service apron. Her breathing turned shallow. The man said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence alone signaled that the incident had been reported and was now far bigger than a slap, a misunderstanding, or a mistake at 30,000 feet. Lauren waited until everyone else disembarked. She was in no rush. She never was. She gathered her bag, stood slowly, smoothed her blazer, and walked to the front of the plane, where Jessica and the man in the suit stood. For a moment, Jessica looked like she might drop to her knees, beg, plead, anything to fix what she'd broken. Lauren didn't give her that chance. "People will forget what you said," Lauren said quietly, her voice calm, soft, almost gentle. "They'll forget what you did, but they won't forget how you made them feel." Jessica's lips trembled, her eyes glassy. "You made me feel invisible," Lauren continued. "Like I didn't belong in a space I built with my own hands. Like I had to prove my worth just to sit there." The man in the suit watched silently, respectfully. letting Lauren have her moment. "And that," Lauren said, stepping closer, "will cost you far more than this job." Jessica's knees seemed to buckle slightly, and she grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. Lauren didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. She didn't need to. She turned and stepped off the plane into the Georgia sun, the world wide open before her. Jessica remained standing amid the wreckage she'd created. Passengers, still lingering in the terminal, looked up as Lauren passed. Some nodded respectfully. Some whispered her name, not for the scandal, but in quiet awe. Lauren adjusted her sunglasses, hoisted her carry-on, and moved on, her heels clicking on the polished floor with each confident step. But the flight wasn't the journey's heart. It was the message left hanging in the air for everyone who'd watched. By the private terminal, Lauren's driver, a tall woman with neatly braided hair and a crisp navy suit, waited by a black town car. Lauren handed over her bag, exhaled slowly, and slid into the back seat, the door closing softly behind her. As they pulled away from the airport, Lauren leaned her head against the cool window, watching the runways fade into the distance. Her cheek still ached faintly where the slap had landed, but that wasn't what stung. It was the bigger picture. How easily people decided who deserved respect and who didn't. How quickly they dismissed you based on your clothes, your skin, the stories they carried in their heads before you even spoke. And how sometimes the best revenge wasn't raising your voice. It was staying still, calm, unshakable. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You okay, ma'am?" Lauren smiled faintly. "I'm fine," she said. "Some lessons just cost more than others." They drove through Atlanta's bustling streets, past glass skyscrapers and corner diners, past construction crews and street musicians, past ordinary people rushing through their complicated days, people who might be judged, underestimated, ignored every hour of their lives. Lauren knew her story wasn't the last. She knew there were thousands of other planes, offices, boardrooms, streets where someone else would have to remind the world that appearances don't define worth. But today, she'd drawn her line in her own way. As the car melted into traffic, the words she carried stayed strong. Never try to fit someone else's narrow mold. Make them open their eyes wide. Make them adjust. Because real power doesn't need to announce itself. It speaks loudest in the moments you stand tall while everyone else stumbles. If you ever find yourself judged before you speak, remember they never had the right to define your worth. Stand firm. Stay calm.